I never imagined I'd end up in a passive-aggressive war over groceries, but here we are. When I bought my first townhome in Willow Creek Estates, it felt like a dream. 2 bedrooms, modern appliances, a tiny but peaceful yard, and neighbors who during the first few weeks seemed polite but happily distant. Just how I liked it. I'd lived in big cities most of my life, so the quiet, tree-lined streets of this Arizona suburb felt like a luxury. It was the kind of place where people still waved from their driveways and dogs didn't need leashes because they were too old or too fat to wander far. For the first few weeks, I was living the suburban fantasy. Weekend barbecues with my own grill, a Costco membership, and the kind of small talk that ends exactly where it should, at the mailbox. Life was good. Then, one Saturday morning, while I was planting lavender in the garden bed near my front step, I heard the unmistakable crunch of orthopedic sneakers on gravel. I looked up and saw her for the first time, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning like a barcode reader, and a plastic badge swinging from a lanyard that said Community Oversight Specialist. The badge looked like it had been laminated at a Kinko's in 1997. "Good morning," she chirped, with a smile that had all the warmth of a DMV line. "I'm Karen Harper, just moved in 2 doors down. I'm conducting an introductory compliance walkthrough." She handed me a card, actual card stock, that read, "Karen Harper, Civic Harmony Coordinator." There was no phone number, no email, just a faded watermark of an eagle clutching a gavel. Still trying to process what compliance walkthrough meant, I stood up and brushed dirt off my hands. Nice to meet you. I'm David, just moved in last month." She gave my hand a limp half shake and immediately scribbled something on her clipboard. "I see you've altered the exterior flora. Were those lavender plantings approved by the Restoration Committee?" My blink must have said it all. "There's no HOA here," I replied. "I checked with the realtor and the property management company. No active board, just basic maintenance fees." Her mouth twitched like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. "That's inaccurate," she said firmly. "The governance structure is in revitalization. You'll be receiving documentation soon." The documentation came in the form of a folded flyer stuffed into every mailbox later that day. It was titled, "Willow Creek Restoration Initiative, Reclaiming Order in Chaos," complete with a logo that looked suspiciously like clip art from a PowerPoint template. Karen had declared herself acting president and outlined 23 proposed neighborhood standards. Everything from lawn length to porch decor to window display cohesion. Most neighbors laughed it off. "She'll get tired," someone shrugged. "Let her play town mayor." I wanted to believe them. I really did. But Karen didn't get tired. Over the next week, little yellow notices started appearing on doors. Mine said I was in violation for bicycle visibility through front window. Apparently, my Trek hybrid had disrupted the visual aesthetic rhythm of the street. The notice cited something called Section 2 Visual Harmony Clause. It was printed in Comic Sans. At first, I thought it was a prank. Then came the second notice for having a non-regulation welcome mat. It just said, "Home Sweet Home." Turns out, in Karen's bylaws, only muted neutrals were community affirming. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a bored neighbor. I was dealing with a suburban dictator in khakis. At first, I tried to stay calm. After all, how much damage could one woman with a home printer and a clipboard really do? But Karen was just getting started. By midweek, more flyers showed up, this time announcing the formation of the Willow Creek Restoration Committee, a transitional governance body until formal HOA elections could be arranged. She included a QR code linking to a Google form titled Neighborhood Loyalty Assessment. One of the questions read, "Do you believe communal order is more important than individual convenience?" Another asked if I owned any non-conforming decor, which I assumed was Karen speak for things that bring joy. The next morning, I woke up to find a laminated card zip-tied to my mailbox. It read, "Subject under visual observation, potential aesthetic risk." There was a date, a timestamp, and a clip art image of binoculars. I stared at it for a solid 10 seconds before realizing I'd become part of someone's spreadsheet. And I wasn't alone. My neighbor Maria found a flyer on her car windshield saying she had committed a vehicular symmetry violation for parking slightly off-center. Our street was starting to look less like a neighborhood and more like a dystopian HOA amusement park, except no one was laughing. Karen wasn't content with passive-aggressive signage either. She began patrolling the sidewalk in a neon vest with community liaison written in Sharpie across the back. She carried a handheld decibel meter and once stopped a 10-year-old on a scooter to lecture him about street tranquility thresholds. On Thursday, I caught her using a measuring tape on the grass next to Frank's driveway. When he asked what she was doing, she replied, "Enforcing perimeter regulation. Your dandelions are exceeding acceptable fluff levels." She said it with a straight face. I nearly choked on my coffee. By now, it was clear Karen was building something, a system, a fantasy regime where she was the unelected queen of suburban compliance. She spoke in phrases like civic synergy and behavioral guidelines, the way cult leaders talk right before people start wearing matching tracksuits. And the worst part, she was dragging the rest of us into it. One neighbor, a sweet elderly woman named Judith, got a notice that her wind chimes were in violation of the auditory cohesion doctrine. She took them down, muttering it's not worth the drama. I started getting suspicious looks just for keeping my porch light on past 10 p.m. Still, I tried to maintain some level of civility. I figured if I stayed quiet, polite, and utterly unremarkable, Karen would eventually turn her focus elsewhere. But I underestimated her appetite for control, because the next flyer wasn't about porch lights or chimes, it was about resources, specifically food. Karen had posted a notice titled Preliminary Community Resource Stabilization Guidelines, which, in plain English, meant she now wanted to monitor everyone's grocery intake. And I laughed when I read it. I shouldn't have, because when I brought home 2 rotisserie chickens and a family-sized pack of canned beans the next day, she was already waiting in my driveway with gloves, a clipboard, and a kitchen scale. She stood there like some dystopian USDA inspector, wearing powder blue latex gloves, a whistle around her neck, and a digital food scale dangling from a lanyard that read Community Nutritional Equity Division. I didn't know whether to laugh or call someone. "David," she began, clipboard poised, "I'll need to audit your provisions before you proceed any further. We've had reports of disproportionate protein accumulation." I blinked, holding 2 grocery bags like a confused contestant on a cooking show. "Karen, it's chicken from Costco. There's no law against dinner." Undeterred, she flipped her clipboard and pointed to a page titled Emergency Provisions, Redistribution Protocol V2.1. Section 4B states that all bulk nutritional acquisitions must be declared and submitted for redistribution based on family unit size and caloric need. Since you're a single male resident, your intake threshold is currently capped at 1.3 chickens per week. I stared at her for a beat too long. "You wrote that yourself." "Community consensus is implied when no one objects in writing," she replied, with a tone that suggested she'd just cited the Constitution. I tried to walk around her, but she sidestepped like a linebacker. "Karen, this is insane. Let me inside with my groceries." "Only after inventory," she said, raising the clipboard like it was a holy relic. At that moment, my neighbor Frank stepped onto his porch holding a half-eaten bagel and muttered, "Jesus, she's escalated to poultry enforcement." Maria, who just pulled into her driveway, rolled down her window and shouted, "Leave him alone. It's literally rotisserie chicken, not gold bullion." Karen turned offended. "Not everyone can afford free-range poultry, Maria. Food hoarding breeds inequality." She pronounced it "inquality," like she was on a TED Talk. I finally slipped past her and into my house, groceries intact, door locked. I exhaled hard and placed the bags on the counter. Then I noticed it. My phone was blowing up. Apparently, Karen had sent an email blast titled Unit 7 Behavior at Unit 7C. It included a photo of me carrying groceries and a pie chart labeled Alarming Surge in Solo Household Consumables. The footer had a quote, "In times of crisis, the selfish become the destabilized." Harper, she was quoting herself. That night, while I was trying to unwind with a microwave burrito, I heard footsteps outside my window. I peeked through the blinds. Karen was pacing in front of my house with a tape measure. She extended it across my driveway, then scribbled something on her clipboard. She glanced up, locked eyes with me through the blinds, and mouthed, "You're on notice." I froze mid-bite. Was this an HOA nightmare or the pilot episode of Suburban Surveillance Season 1? The next morning, taped to my door was a formal notice bearing her usual homemade logo, a house wrapped in barbed wire with the words Willow Creek Stability Zone. It stated that I was in violation of the newly implemented monthly nutritional disclosure mandate, and I was required to submit a food inventory form within 48 hours, complete with photos and weight approximations of all perishable. I almost tossed it until I saw the fine print. Non-compliance may result in a community trust penalty of $75.00, subject to increase pending caloric value withheld. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to blow over. It was going to boil over. 2 days later, my canned beans went missing. Not metaphorically, I mean they physically vanished. I had left a bag of non-perishables on my porch while I ran back to the car to grab a case of sparkling water. When I returned, the beans, rice, and a perfectly good jar of peanut butter were gone. I checked the Ring camera footage, already suspecting the obvious. There she was, Karen wearing gardening gloves, a sun hat, and sunglasses the size of satellite dishes. She tiptoed up to my porch like a suburban raccoon, grabbed the grocery bag, looked around, and disappeared like she just pulled off a bank job. I replayed the footage 3 times just to confirm it wasn't some bizarre fever dream. Then I forwarded it to my neighbor, Maria, whose reply came in all caps. "Oh my God, she's actually raiding our food." Maria uploaded a screenshot to the neighborhood group chat, and within minutes, the thread exploded. Turns out I wasn't the first. Judith had lost a box of granola bars. Frank's vitamin supplements had vanished from a package. Even the Jeffersons had been missing Gatorade for weeks. No one had suspected Karen, mostly because no one expected a 50-something woman in capri pants to be running a one-woman redistribution racket. Later that afternoon, I confronted her at the sidewalk. "Karen, I have you on camera taking my groceries." She didn't even blink. Secured community provisions is not theft, it's public service. "You walked off with my beans," I snapped, without asking. "That's called stealing," she sniffed. "Under the Emergency Resource Fairness Clause, all excess sustenance may be temporarily collected for redistribution during uncertain supply periods." "That clause doesn't exist," I said. "You made that up in Excel." "Prove it," she shot back with a smug smile. "You'll need to submit a complaint to the Food Oversight Subcommittee. Applications are reviewed quarterly." She walked off like she just won a debate tournament. The next day, every resident received a new flyer in their mailbox, printed on mint green cardstock, this time titled Oak Ridge Emergency Nutritional Tithes Schedule. According to Karen, all households were now expected to contribute 10% of their monthly food purchases to a central pantry for community readiness. The flyer included a table of high-priority items: canned goods, protein staples, grains, and, suspiciously, coffee and imported dark chocolate. She had even added footnotes with estimated contribution weights. I stared at the list, wondering when exactly our neighborhood turned into a volunteer-run FEMA camp. And of course, the flyer ended with a penalty clause. Failure to submit monthly tithe may result in fines, loss of community privileges, or temporary trust reassessment. I didn't know what trust reassessment meant, but I was pretty sure it involved more clipboard time than I could stomach. By this point, Karen was no longer a nuisance. She was a full-blown threat to pantry sovereignty. And still, some residents shrugged it off. "Let her play secretary of the neighborhood," Frank mumbled. "It's harmless." But I knew better now. Karen wasn't just fantasizing. She was executing. I emailed the property management company with the footage and flyers. They replied within hours. "There is no authorized food tithe, pantry program, or HOA leadership at Willow Creek Estates. Any claims otherwise should be documented and forwarded to local authorities." Attached was a formal letter stating Karen had zero authority to request food, money, or information from any resident. I printed 5 copies and taped one to my front door like a badge of legal immunity. Then, just in case, I installed a second Ring cam, this one aimed squarely at the front steps. But Karen wasn't done. That evening, I caught her standing in front of my garage, measuring the distance between my recycling bin and the curb. When I stepped outside, she turned sharply, clutching her clipboard. "Non-compliance level 2, she muttered, scribbling furiously. "You've got until Friday." "Until Friday for what?" I asked. She looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "To make things right." Then she turned and walked into the night like she'd just delivered a prophecy. Saturday afternoon, 92 degrees. My car was loaded with groceries from a mega sale at Costco. Bulk everything, from eggs to cereal to an industrial-sized tub of peanut butter that could have survived the apocalypse. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her, Karen, already standing at the end of the sidewalk like a heat wave hallucination, clipboard in one hand, laminated badge flapping on a string around her neck, and a small plastic cooler labeled Superinception Unit sitting next to her feet. She was wearing latex gloves again, which felt wildly excessive for someone auditing cereal. I barely had a chance to step out when she raised her voice. David Moore, please pause for inspection. Bulk nutritional items must be assessed before residential intake. She said it with the cadence of a TSA agent who just found contraband hummus. Karen, I'm not doing this with you today, I said, grabbing 2 grocery bags and trying to move past. She stepped directly in front of me like a security checkpoint in khakis. You are in violation of the Willow Creek Emergency Food Stabilization Mandate. Noncompliance at this stage triggers level 3 sanctions. I don't even know what that means, I said, trying not to laugh. It means, she replied, voice rising, that you are hoarding. You are prioritizing personal consumption over collective resilience. She actually pulled out a digital scale from her cooler and held it up. Just give me 30% of the proteins and 10% of the grains. That's standard redistribution protocol. You can keep the condiments. I stared at her. You want to weigh my chicken and rice on my driveway? In the interest of fairness, she nodded. At this point, other residents had come out. Frank stood on his porch, sipping iced tea like it was a sporting event. Maria was filming from her lawn chair. Judith, bless her heart, held up a sign that read, "Respect the rice right." Karen, I said, lowering my bags, there is no mandate. There's no food tithe. Unless you want to go viral for assaulting a man over frozen waffles, I suggest you get out of my way. She gasped. This is your 3rd violation. You're dangerously close to forced compliance measures. And then, in full dramatic glory, she pulled out her phone and dialed, yes, hello. I'd like to report a violation of emergency community protocols. We have a resident hoarding food supplies, refusing inspection, and endangering neighborhood cohesion. Address is 4472 Willow Bend Lane. She looked directly at me while giving the dispatcher my name. He's refusing to participate in mandatory redistribution. He's becoming combative. She hung up, breathing heavily, like she'd just filed the final paperwork for a civil war. I stood there, stunned, bags in hand. Karen, you just called the cops because I wouldn't hand over rotisserie chicken? It's about principle, she said, straightening her badge, and protein accountability. Within 15 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, clearly confused. One was holding an iced coffee. Karen practically sprinted over, waving her clipboard like a white flag soaked in red ink. Officers, thank goodness. I've been managing neighborhood emergency protocol, and this resident has refused all forms of compliance. I fear he may be stockpiling. The older officer turned to me. Sir, you mind explaining what's going on? I nodded, calmly walked over, and handed him a folder I had prepared 3 days ago because I'd learned. Inside, my property ownership documents, a letter from the property management company stating no HOA authority existed, and printed screenshots of Karen's flyers. Also, I added, if you'd like to see footage of her taking food from my porch, I have that queued up too. The officer flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. Karen tried to interrupt but was silenced with a raised hand. Ma'am, the officer said, from what I'm seeing here, you don't have any legal standing to issue these demands. And confiscating your neighbor's groceries, that's not enforcement. That's theft. Karen's face turned the shade of overripe tomatoes. But he's hoarding. Look at his cart. That's enough peanut butter for an army? The younger officer muttered, I mean, it's Costco. That's kind of the point. I stood back, watching as Karen sputtered into incoherence. A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, phones out, smirking. Frank clapped once, slowly. Maria shouted, hey, TikTok, meet the food police. And as the officers gently pulled Karen aside to issue a warning, I realized this wasn't just about groceries anymore. This was about a woman trying to create a personal dictatorship out of paper forms and delusion. And for once, reality had caught up to her. But I knew Carrie wasn't done, not yet. Karen may have lost the battle over the chicken, but she clearly hadn't given up the war. Less than 24 hours after the police cruiser pulled away from my curb, every resident at Willow Creek received a new flyer, this one printed on shimmering ivory cardstock, folded like an invitation to a cult wedding. It was titled, The Willow Creek Unified Provisions Alliance Charter. At the bottom, in bold cursive, it read, by authority of emergency civic decree. Karen had escalated her game again. Inside the packet was a mandatory resident pledge form, a QR code to submit household pantry inventories, and a personal message signed Kay Harper, Interim Director of Community Integrity. I flipped the flyer over, there was a graph. She had charted my shopping patterns. There's a bar titled David, concerning trend line, another titled Frank, unverified cheese activity. This was no longer neighborhood micromanagement. This was a suburban surveillance state with clip art, but this time we were ready. I'd already shared the grocery theft footage with the property management company, and they responded fast. Linda, the office manager who sounded perpetually unimpressed by nonsense, sent me an official letter stamped and signed. There is no HOA, no active committee, and no authority granted to any resident for food collection, redistribution, or behavioral enforcement. Any continued attempt to impersonate governors should be reported to local authorities. I made 10 copies. I wasn't the only one. Frank, the retired attorney, went further. He submitted a complaint to the Arizona State HOA Oversight Office, detailing Karen's actions over the past month. Turns out, impersonating a governance body, especially while soliciting items of value like food or money, can qualify as misdemeanor fraud. Meanwhile, Michelle, the paralegal from Unit 4B, created a digital archive she called Karen Watch, where neighbors could upload photos of bogus notices, screenshots of emails, and her favorite, Karen's personal food redistribution calendar, which had time slots color-coded by protein type. That weekend, we staged a community clapback. I hosted an impromptu neighborhood transparency hour in my front yard. Maria brought iced coffee, Frank wore his old courtroom tie, and Michelle set up a projector on a collapsible chair. As the sun dipped low, I stood in front of a half-dozen lawn chairs and hit play. The screen lit up with a Ring camera clip. Karen, dressed like a beach burglar, stealing peanut butter and beans. A slow gasp rippled through the crowd. Then came the screenshots, the food tithe memo, the visual harmony violations, the fake bylaws written in Comic Sans. Laughter mixed with disbelief. Someone passed out popcorn. Frank raised a hand. As of this week, I've filed a formal cease and desist on behalf of the Willow Creek Tennis Group, and I've CC'd the county office. Karen Harper is now under official review for unauthorized governance claims. Maria Follow, I found the Venmo account she listed on her flyer. It's literally named @ResourceQueenAZ. I reported it. Karen tried to intervene, showed up in the middle of the slideshow carrying a binder that said version 4, revised enforcement codes. But this time, no one listened. Frank simply said, Karen, this isn't a HOA meeting. This is a neighborhood, and you're not in charge here. Michelle handed her a physical letter, a notice of no contact from 5 households. And by the way, she added, if you step onto anyone's porch again with a clipboard, it qualifies as harassment under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 132921. I printed it for you. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her laminated badge slid off her shirt and hit the grass with a sad little thud. The crowd watched in silence. It wasn't rage anymore. It was rejection, a slow burn of collective exhaustion that had finally caught flame. But if I've learned anything in suburbia, it's that when a Karen retreats, she's not done. She's regrouping. By Monday, it was official. The Karen regime had fallen. The flyers stopped. The fake bylaws disappeared. And for the first time in a month, no new violations appeared on doors or windshields. Karen's curtains stayed shut all day, and her porch, once headquarters of self-declared authority, was now just a slab of concrete with a dead potted fern. You could feel it in the air. The neighborhood exhaled. But we didn't stop there. Michelle submitted our collective documentation to the local police precincts. Videos, screenshots, fake notices, even one neighbor's voice memo where Karen left a 3-minute rant on voicemail about residential nutritional imbalances. The response came fast. Karen received a formal warning for harassment and impersonating a regulatory entity. It wasn't jail, but it was legal recognition that what she'd done wasn't just annoying, it was wrong. At the same time, Frank worked his magic and got a neighborhood meeting approved, an actual one hosted in the park down the block under proper permit and with folding chairs from Linda at the property management office. We called it Willow Creek Reconnect, and people showed up, like really showed up. The lady with the parrot, the couple with matching Crocs, even old Mr. Donnelly, who hadn't left his porch since 2008. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about reclaiming our space from chaos, from clipboard tyranny. Someone brought donuts. Someone else brought speakers. Maria set up a table for block party planning. Frank proposed a rotating neighborhood support squad instead of a formal HOA. Just folks helping each other shovel snow, water plants, or walk dogs during vacations. We even talked about organizing a summer picnic potluck style. No fees, no bylaws, just people being decent. That evening, the group chat changed its name. What was once Willow Creek Updates became Zero Karen Tolerance Zone. The profile pic, a stock image of a clipboard on fire. It was satire. It was solidarity. It was healing. Karen, meanwhile, didn't leave her house. But that didn't mean she was done. That Wednesday, I found something strange taped to my trash bin, a folded sheet of paper, laminated, of course, titled Reform Plan, Phase 2. Community Ethics Revival. It had no signature, but I didn't need one. The final bullet point read, "The silent ones are often the most dangerous." I stared at it for a full minute before laughing out loud, because if that was a warning, it was the weakest one I'd ever seen. Or maybe it wasn't. I was almost convinced it was over. The flyers had stopped, the warnings had stopped, the clipboard had stopped, and for a few glorious days, life in Willow Creek returned to what it should have been all along, quiet, neighborly, and completely free of laminated threats. People waved without suspicion. Maria actually brought me banana bread. Frank let kids touch his vintage lawn gnome without issuing citations. The community we were all promised when we signed our leases had finally shown up, just not in the way the brochures imagined. We even held our first official event, the Karen Free Cookout. It was tongue-in-cheek, but wildly cathartic. Someone made custom aprons that read "Grill, Not Govern." We had burgers, games, music. Michelle brought a cake shaped like a clipboard, which we ceremonially cut in half. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. And then, 3 days later, it happened. A single Tupperware container appeared on my doorstep. Inside, a half-eaten rotisserie chicken breast. On the lid, written in smudged dry erase marker, "You took more than you needed." No note, no explanation, just Karen's calling card in plastic and poultry. I checked the ring footage. There she was, crouching low like a midnight possum, sliding a container onto my mat like it was a cursed relic. Her expression, grim determination. Her hoodie said "Hope Restored" in glitter paint. I posted the video in the group chat. Responses came in immediately. Maria, she's gone full Hunger Games. I vote we build a fake HOA just to evict her. Michelle, that counts as food tampering. Want me to file? It would have been funny if it ended there, but I checked the footage from earlier in the week. Sure enough, at 2:13 a.m. and 2 nights prior, Karen had been in my yard. Again. She wasn't just delivering deli meat messages this time. She was measuring the height of my lavender with a ruler and muttering to herself. I couldn't make out all of it, but I caught a few phrases. Revival phase. Non-compliant growth. The reckoning begins. That was the last straw. I reported the footage. This time, the police took it seriously. Trespassing, stalking, repeat harassment. It was enough for a restraining order. I signed the papers the next day. Karen would now be legally required to stay at least 150 feet away from my home, and any contact, physical, verbal, or poultry-based, would be considered a violation. But the best part wasn't the paperwork, it was the ripple. The day after the order was served, neighbors started putting up signs in their yards. Produce-free zones. Say no to illegal chicken drop-offs. This house believes in pantry autonomy. Someone even made stickers that said, "Defund the clipboard." It was viral, dumb, beautiful, unity. And Karen, she closed her blinds. Again. But we all knew it wasn't over, because 2 weeks later, a new post appeared on Nextdoor from someone living one neighborhood over. The subject line, anyone else getting strange flyers about food redistribution? Sometimes protecting your boundaries means saying no to a neighbor with a clipboard and a chicken agenda. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a reminder that power, when unchecked and unvoted, turns absurd real fast. But here's the twist. Her reign brought us together. We went from strangers with fences to a community with purpose, forged by satire and solidarity. In the end, revenge wasn't rage, it was documentation, laughter, and rotisserie resilience. So if you've ever dealt with your own HOA Karen, tell us below. What was the wildest rule they tried to invent. Drop it in the comments. We're building the Hall of Karen fame. And hey, if you enjoyed this suburban saga of justice, chaos, and canned beans, hit that like button, share it with your favorite neighbor, and don't forget to subscribe, because in this neighborhood, we grill burgers, not freedoms.